Most of you next to reporter. This should do it. Hello, I'm Dr. Tracy Power. I teach history here at Newberry College. I'm also the college archivist. This is an informal history of the college, just to give you an idea of who we are and where we've come from since we were founded in 1856. The Latin motto on the college seal, the English translation is "For Church and Posterity." And Newberry College was founded specifically to train young men at that time in the 19th century, to train young men to be ministers. Reverend John Bachman, the pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church in Charleston, proposed a Lutheran seminary at the Synod of South Carolina. The Synod was the body that governed the Lutheran Church in South Carolina. He proposed a Lutheran seminary in 1828, and over the years, there was consideration given to not only creating a seminary, but also a college. The Synod of South Carolina approved the idea of the Lutheran College, which is now Newberry, in the 1830s. The ground was broken on this site for Newberry College in 1857. This depiction of the groundbreaking is from the 1934 Newberryan, the annual that included images of history of the college over the years. This newspaper article is from the Newberry Mirror in 1857, listing the things that were deposited beneath the cornerstone of the original building. This is the Newberry College original building. It was built 1857-1858 on the present campus on what is now College Street. It stands where Smeltzer Hall now stands. This is the only photograph we have of it. The crack through the middle is the glass plate negative that is cracked. It was larger than Smeltzer Hall and more elaborate. It was built in the Gothic Revival style. In 1859, the first catalog of the officers and students of Newberry College was published in Philadelphia. 1859 was the first year we held classes. This is the frontispiece from the 1859 catalog, which is a beautiful engraving, obviously taken from that first photograph. As I mentioned, Reverend Bachman was the pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church in Charleston. He was a native of New York State. He came to South Carolina in 1815 for his health, remained, became a transplanted South Carolinian, and was pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church from 1815 till 1874. One of his friends and confidants was the naturalist John James Audubon, who was famous, of course, for producing the huge folio Birds of America, published in 1842. Dr. Bachman showed Audubon around plantations in South Carolina where Audubon hunted and painted birds. They were also very close because Audubon's two sons married Bachman's two daughters. You see the sculpture for Bachman's Finch that Audubon named for Bachman on the Alumni Music Center, the AMC, and a beautiful painting of the finch from Audubon's books of Birds of America. Also Bachman's warbler that he named after Reverend Bachman. The same two, a sculpture on the AMC, and also the beautiful painting from Birds of America. Reverend Bachman was a transplanted South Carolinian, and he became convinced that the institution of slavery as practiced in South Carolina, as practiced in the southern United States in the 19th century, was ordained by God, that slavery was mentioned in the Bible. It said, slaves, obey your masters. And Bachman believed that masters should be kind to the enslaved people in their care, but he also was a proponent of the idea that slavery was actually good for the enslaved. That when they were brought to America from Africa, they were civilized, that when they were taught to read the Bible and accept Christ, they were Christianized. And this theory sounds very far out in 2021, but in the 19th century, this was one of the justifications of the institution of slavery. And Bachman, although he was not a slaveholder himself, he was a supporter of the institution of slavery and believed that it was ordained by God. He also believed that masters should do what they could to make the institution more humane, but of course, making slavery humane was impossible. In December 1860, just after the election of Abraham Lincoln, South Carolina was determined to leave the Union to protect the institution of slavery. The other southern states were agitating for the same thing. This is Institute Hall in Charleston. It burned the next year in 1861, but this was a fabulous Italianate revival building in Charleston, a large meeting place. And the secession convention of South Carolina, delegates elected from all over the state to consider whether South Carolina should leave the Union, met at Institute Hall. They voted 169 to nothing for South Carolina to leave the Union, and Reverend Bachman said the prayer when the secession ordinance was signed on December 21st, 1860. One of the things he said in his prayer, he asked God to enable us to protect and help thy humble race that has been entrusted to our care. South Carolina leaves the Union. There's one Unionist who said that South Carolina was too small to be a republic, but too large to be an insane asylum at the time. But this is a broadside of the Charleston Mercury that was printed the day South Carolina left the Union on its own. This is Reverend Josiah P. Smeltzer. Smeltzer Hall is named for him. He was president of Newberry College throughout the Civil War and Reconstruction eras. He arrived in Newberry April 6th, 1861. He assumed the presidency of Newberry College April 8th, 1861. Why are those dates important? Because April 12th, 1861, the Civil War began at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. So you could say that Reverend Smeltzer's timing was unfortunate. He superintended the college. It struggled, both the college section and the seminary section struggled throughout the war. That's because many students and several professors left to join the Confederate Army. This is a watercolor of the original building from the 1934 annual, the Newberry. In the summer and fall of 1865, Union troops occupied the Newberry College campus. This is another watercolor from the Newberryan. And they filled the roof, the flat roof, they filled the roof with water to cool off in the summer and fall heat. There was significant damage to the building already because the college had not had the means to pay for maintenance or repairs to it. And the federal troops damaged the building even further. This is Colonel Charles Van Wyck. He was a colonel in the United States Army. He commanded the 56th New York Infantry that was occupying the campus. We'll hear more from him in a little bit. In 1868, the finances were destroyed. The college building was in shambles, and the Lutheran community in the town of Walhalla, up in the upstate in Oconee County, suggested to Newberry that the college might be hosted up there. And so Newberry College actually leaves this campus for Walhalla in 1868. It remains there until 1877. In 1877, the college hires G.T. Berg, an architect, to examine the original, by now mostly abandoned building on the campus and decide what to do with it. Could it be repaired? Could it be rebuilt? Should it be torn down and started over? And Mr. Berg told the college board of trustees that the building was in such bad shape it should be torn down, that parts of it could be saved and should be in terms of what we would now call recycling, but that the building was in such sad shape that if you tore it down, you'd have to worry about endangering the life and limb of the workmen. Many towns in South Carolina wanted Newberry College. Walhalla wanted to keep it. Newberry wanted it back. Anderson, Abbeville, Columbia, Lexington, other towns wanted it, and so they bid for the right to host the college. Reverend Henry Coons of the Church of the Redeemer in downtown Newberry was influential in getting Newberry College back to Newberry. The college returned in the fall of 1877. The new building was in the process of being built. It wasn't completed, and classes were held on the second story of a business downtown in Newberry. This is the first depiction of Smeltzer Hall that we know of. This is the frontispiece for the 1878-1879 catalog. Smeltzer Hall, that stands on College Street, is the oldest building on campus. It was built on the site of the original building. Here's a photograph of it today. When I came to Newberry College in 2014, I came from the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, where I had worked in historic preservation. And there was always something about Smeltzer Hall that bothered me. These granite balusters on either side of the entrance on College Street are out of scale. They're too big. They're also not the correct architectural style for the building. Now, colleges and universities do that sort of thing all the time, but it was a puzzle. I wondered why this detail looked like it did. Well, when I found the specifications of the architect, who said salvage anything you can, that gave me an idea. And then I also found documentation that those two granite balusters are the original balusters from the 1858 original building. So there is at least one aspect of the original building left. Here is Colonel Charles Van Wyck of the 56th New York Infantry after the war. He was a United States Senator. He had moved from New York to Nebraska. And the reason he is in this story now is that President George B. Cromer of Newberry College met with President of the United States, William McKinley, in 1898. There was a concern on the campus and in the community that the federal troops had damaged the original building enough that there should be reparations paid for it. And Senator Van Wyck, who had been the commander of the Union troops that damaged the original building, was fully in support of it. And so Newberry College won reparations of $15,000 for the United States, from the United States government, for the damages caused to the building in 1865. I will say, as a Civil War historian, that's pretty rare. The United States government did not usually pay reparations to organizations or institutions or communities that suffered damage during the war. This is Keller Hall. It was built in 1894-95. It was built as a memorial to a student who died very young here by his parents. The library was originally in Keller Hall. Here's some historic photographs from the catalog. This bust of Martin Luther was donated to Newberry College in 1862, and it stands in the lobby of Holland Hall. The college had a museum from the 1880s to the Great Depression. We have photographs of the museum and some listings of what was in it. At present, we don't know that we have any items that were in the museum, but I'm still searching. Holland Hall, the administration building, was built in 1904-05, and it was built with part of that $15,000 that was paid to Newberry from the federal government. You probably will not recognize this building unless you have seen the history of Newberry College, the published history. This is the engineering building, also called Carnegie Hall. It was funded by the Carnegie Foundation. It was the engineering and technical building. It stood where the classroom building now sits, McClurg. 1906 postcard of it. It's a large and handsome building. This is one of my favorite images in the history of the college. This is a 1906-1907 postcard that shows historic buildings, several of which still stand. Another 1907 postcard showing Keller Hall and Smeltzer Hall. The Newberryan was the annual, and in 1912, the college annual contained a notice of something that is one of the more unusual stories of Newberry College history. And that is, it claimed to have the Newberry College Aviation School. Lewis H. Wink was the director. There actually was no Newberry College Aviation School. Wink was a student from North Augusta who was fascinated by manned flight. Now, in 1912, the Wright brothers' original airplane was only 9 years old. So this is very early in the infancy of manned flight, successful manned flight. But Wink, who is standing at the left in this photograph, built an airplane. He built a monoplane, a one-wing plane, and a biplane, a two-wing plane, and successfully flew them. We're still looking for more information about him. But the idea that a Newberry College student built an airplane in 1912 is a pretty remarkable story. Here's a postcard from 1919. If you're standing in front of Derrick Hall, looking up the quad, up the hill toward Holland Hall, this is the view you would have seen in 1919. So the building on the right is Carnegie Hall. The building up the hill on the right is the gymnasium that was built in the 1920s. A frontispiece from the 1920s catalog showing the old path, one of the sidewalks that's still in the same place, but in front of Keller and Smeltzer. A 1940s postcard that shows Derrick on the right and the building on the left is Carnegie Hall, where the classroom building is now. In the 1940s, there was rationing, and so the college didn't produce a catalog or bulletin. This is a trifold that includes the slogan "V for Victory" in World War II. Also in World War II, the United States Navy trained young men to be officers in the Navy at the same time they got a college education. This was a program that was nationwide, and there were about 800 cadets in the U.S. Navy V-12 program on the campus between 1943 and 45. It helped stabilize the finances of the college and helped the college stay open when it might have otherwise not been able to. The Department of the Navy commended Newberry College for its effective work with the U.S. Navy in the Navy V-12 program between 1943 and 45. This is a 1947 postcard of Holland Hall, and it looks much the same today in 2021. This is the Dufford Alumni House, which was actually built in the 1910s, but by 1938, it was the home of C.A. Dufford Sr., Alma Dufford, and their 4 children, C.A. Jr., Virginia, Doris, and Bill. And Bill Dufford, in the class of 1949, he actually graduated Newberry College on D-Day, graduated Newberry High School on D-Day, then went off to the United States Navy in World War II, came back, graduated Newberry College in the class of 1949, and he and his siblings donated their family home on College Street to the college. It's called the Dufford Alumni House. But there's also an exhibit in the Dufford Diversity Lab of the Center for Teacher Education at the Spear Street School. Dr. Dufford, after he graduated Newberry College, received his MA at the University of South Carolina, his PhD in education at the University of Florida, and was a lifelong progressive educator, including being a pioneer during the civil rights movement in South Carolina and successfully integrating schools. There's a quote on the wall of the Dufford Diversity Lab that says, "We must respect the dignity of the past, but know and respect the fact that our past means different things to different people." He is the author of My Tour Through the Asylum, going back to that quote from James Lewis Pettigrew that South Carolina was too small to be a republic, but too large to be an insane asylum. This is his memoir of working in education in the 1960s and 70s and 80s in South Carolina. It's an award-winning book published by the University of South Carolina Press. Dr. Dufford is also the donor and sponsor of Dufford Diversity Week, which is held every October to promote and educate the college community and the wider community about diversity, equity, and inclusion. In 1956, the college celebrated its centennial. This is a banner that was displayed then on the campus. And in 1966, Miss Nancy Lou Anderson was the first African-American student at Newberry College. She entered the college in the fall of 1966, expecting to be one of 10 African-American students. She was the only one. She graduated in 1970 and was then the first graduate of Newberry College. She was an educator, and in 2015, she was featured in the alumni magazine Dimensions. Here's a photograph of Dr. Dufford taken last year, Dufford Diversity and Inclusion Week 2020. This photograph was actually taken on his 94th birthday. He just turned 95 a couple of weeks ago. But last fall, there was a ceremony to honor Ms. Nancy Anderson Glasgow. And just last Friday, which would have been October 29th, 2021, there was a classroom in the Center for Teacher Education that was named for Ms. Glasgow. And during the dedication ceremony, she informed the crowd there that she had actually taught in that classroom. And so it is now named for her. The Science and Math building was built in 1969. This is a postcard in 1970 when it was brand new. One thing that may be of interest, the students in the student newspaper, The Indian, the day the building was dedicated, asked the administration to consider naming it after someone, because the 1962 classroom building that was named McClurg in the early 2000s, it was a classroom building for 40 plus years. Well, the Science and Math building still in 2021, 50 plus years later, is the Science and Math building. Newberry College athletic teams were the Indians for 100 years, from 1909 to 2009. And this is the Newberry College baseball team of 1909. The colors, of course, of the college are scarlet and gray. And the story goes that the baseball team wanted uniforms. They couldn't afford new ones. And they found out from a vendor that a minor league baseball team had ordered uniforms but not paid for them. So they got them at a reduced price. And when they went out on the field, somebody said, "Look at them red men." And that's how Newberry College became the Indians. The Stylus was a literary magazine, and this is a quotation from 1909 about that same time. "The knife of the red man has lifted the scalp of his foes and has drunk deep of the lifeblood of college teams." And so for 100 years, Newberry College teams were the Newberry Indians. The first football team was established in 1913. And you see these images from the college annuals, Indians from the 1920s, the 1930s. This is an automobile decal. The 1940s showing the V-12 Navy cadet and the Indian chief. Late in the 1940s after World War II, another car decal from 1947, and into the 1970s. So that Newberry College was the Indians for about 100 years. By the 2000s, the NCAA requested that all colleges and universities that had Indian mascot names change them in favor of a more equitable depiction of African Americans, of Native Americans. There's a group that has the slogan, "We are not your mascot," that a human being should not be a mascot. This was the Indian profile on Kaufman Hall, the cafeteria, from 1959 to 2005, donated by students. And once the NCAA proposed that colleges and universities drop Indian mascots, images, traditions, words, there was a good deal of discussion on Newberry College campus about it. The president at the time, Dr. Mitchell Zais, was really against the idea. He said in public, "We will, without any apology, proudly continue to use the Indian nickname." Many members of the Board of Trustees favored that and wanted to fight the NCAA on it. But the college faculty voted 48-0 the other way to drop the Indian nickname. And the resolution said that this was a disservice to others and could be used to perpetuate stereotyping practices and behavior, and that the faculty called for discontinuing the use of any Native American mascot nickname and logos. So this discussion, this debate, this battle went on for 5 years, from 2005 to 2009. And I think it's interesting that the president and the Board of Trustees were on one side of the issue and the faculty were on the other side. But in 2009, the Indian name and mascot image, all those traditions were retired. And for a year, Newberry had no mascot. The athletic teams were just depicted with an N. One jokester said that the N stood for the Newberry Nothings. But in 2010, the Newberry athletic teams became the Newberry Wolves. There's a wonderful sculpture that was put on the erected on the front campus a few years ago. It's a dramatic depiction in 3D of the logo. There are some folks that still want to say that they're Newberry Indians. This is a decal by a local artist that has the wolf head inside the Indian profile. And you still see, I saw just recently at homecoming, I saw a lot of alums who were wearing Newberry caps and t-shirts that said Newberry Indians rather than the Newberry Wolves. Newberry College is an amazing place. I say that as a historian, I say that as a historic preservationist. We have history all around us. And if you pay attention to it, you may find out more history than you think. History is just not something that's dead and in a book and that you have to memorize dates and facts. There's living history all around our campus. I say all the time that if Newberry College had had a great deal of money in the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, we probably would have torn down our historic buildings and started over. And I think we would have lost something on our campus. Here's some images from the 1920s and current images. Keller Hall, Holland Hall. And this is the former Newberry College archives. It was on the basement floor of Wessel's library. We have had to move it due to concerns about the condition of the collection in terms of threats of humidity, temperature, water, and other things. But I was hired to not only teach American history at Newberry, which I love to do and proudly do, but also to serve as the college archivist. So we have a large collection of photographs, documents, publications, and artifacts that tell the story of Newberry College history. And I tell my students all the time that history has a reputation, which is deserved. Many people think history is boring, and what I tell them is most of the word history is story. And if you can tell a story and get people interested in that, you may get them interested in history. Well, I am delighted and honored to be able to tell stories about Newberry College's history. I want to share those with the public. We were lucky enough to publish an article in a recent issue of Dimensions, the Alumni magazine, about the 1918 influenza pandemic 100+ years ago and how it affected Newberry College. And so I'm hoping that maybe once or twice a year, I'll be able to author an article in Dimensions. And I'll also be able to give talks to the Newberry County Museum and Historical Society about the college history. Thank you very much. That was under 30 minutes. You can probably edit the, can you edit the